All right, let's bring in right now the chairman of the House Freedom Caucus, Mark Meadows from North Carolina. Congressman, always great to talk to you. Let's start by, first of all, I just got to ask you, did you go to Ivy League college by any chance? Were you really smart?
No, I didn't. So I was actually down at University of South Florida in Tampa.
Oh, good for you. Good for you in God's country.
Yeah.
That's good.
Yeah.
That's very good to know. So let me ask you a couple questions. Obviously, everybody's talking about tax reform. I want to talk about something, though, that's always concerned me and has always concerned conservatives, and that is the deficit. Report came out a couple days ago that the deficit's exploding upward. It's much higher this year than expected, close to $700 billion. It's expected to be $1 trillion faster than expected for lots of reasons. But even with dynamic scoring on these tax cuts that you guys are talking about, the deficit still explodes. What can be done to move us back to a direction where we can even start talking about balanced budgets again?
Well, Joe, maybe you need to leave from behind the desk and come back and run for Congress again. We know that you were a fiscal hawk. And so, really, Washington, D.C. does one thing very well, and that's spend money. And very few times do they show restraint. You know, the budget that we passed out of the House actually had $203 billion in mandatory spending cuts. It goes to the Senate. There's nothing cut. And you're right, the deficit continues to increase. And certainly as we look at tax reform, the $1.5 trillion that's in the Senate budget that will pass later today in the House, it does not shed a good light in terms of the deficit. So what the strategy that has been employed not only by the White House but by many conservative members is really trying to return much of that money back to the taxpayer, make sure we give them back their money. It's theirs to begin with, and hopefully get the economy going so that what we can do is actually broaden the base and actually increase the amount of revenue because of growth, and then continue to make some fiscal decisions going on. But I've been here long enough. You were here where you got to see that very few times when it comes to cutting a program can you make that happen. So I think the biggest thing for us is making sure that we don't grow the size of government going forward in the next 10 to 15 years. If we just cap that at about a 2.75% rate, we can balance over 15 even with this tax cut. That's what I'm hopeful we can do.
But won't this tax cut actually increase the deficit and make it go up even more? Well, even with dynamic scoring.
Even with dynamic scoring, I want to be intellectually honest. Certainly in the short run, it does that. I can make the case with GDP growth over about a 15 to 16-year period that it will balance over that length of time. But in the short run, we will see an increase in deficit. It's not something that, I espouse or think is necessarily the best way, but it's the only thing that we can get through a GOP-led Senate, and I would say it's not just the GOP senators. I mean, if you looked at the Democrat budget that was voted on in the House, it actually had $10 trillion in new spending and increased the deficit threefold on what we will be voting on today. So there's not a whole lot of fiscal restraint. So you have to take an approach to hopefully increase the GDP growth. We've got a very aggressive pro-growth tax reform plan that is being rolled out in the coming days here that hopefully will get us back on the right track.
To make this tax reform package pass, you and Republicans in the Senate and any Democrat that wants to cooperate, you're going to have to close about $4 trillion in tax loopholes. That is going to cause, I promise you, the greatest mass migration from K Street to Capitol Hill that you have seen in your time on Capitol Hill. And while you may disagree with some of the things Bob Corker has said over the past month, I don't, but you may. The one thing that Bob Corker says that you should agree with is that's going to make tax reform every bit as tough as passing health care reform. That while it unites the party, do you have 218 members that are going to be able to say no to all the lobbyist groups when you start closing trillions of dollars in tax loopholes?
You know, Joe, you're spot on, and everything you just said, I wouldn't disagree with a single thing. I can tell you that I've met with Senator Corker on a number of things. He is indeed a deficit hawk. I went over to meet with him and talk to him about really this budget agreement that they have in the Senate. But you're right. I mean, we have already started to see, but we are going to see legions of K Street lobbyists coming in, and that's why it's important for members of the Freedom Caucus to really make sure that their voice is heard. You know, we believe that, you know, our lobbyists are really the millions of forgotten American men and women back home that don't have lobbyists here, that we've got to advocate on their behalf for those middle income wage earners. And yet it's already started. We had probably 10 or 15 CFOs here yesterday from Fortune 500 companies talking about what they want to see. You know, the interesting thing is what I've shared is everybody is for cutting out those corporate loopholes unless it's their corporate loophole. And so I'm very aggressive, willing to stand up to a lot of the special interest carve-outs and making sure that we're doing that, meeting with Democrats to see if we can find some common ground to not only address that, but make sure that we put more money in those middle income wage earners' pockets and not just special interest here on Capitol Hill.
All right, University of South Florida's Mark Meadows. Go Bulls. Thank you so much for being with us. And by the way,
Joe.
good luck closing those $4 trillion in tax loopholes. It's going to be quite a
We need your help. Come on back. All right.
Yeah. Okay, I won't be doing that. Thank you.
All right.
Mika, back to you. You know, this is for anybody that's been on Capitol Hill before and has seen tax reform or any variation of it where you're starting to change the tax code to give tax cuts to one group or take tax cuts away from one group, that is when the most intense lobbying comes. That's what we're going to be talking to Bob Corker about. Mark Meadows is right. He's a deficit hawk. And I personally, I don't know how they get the votes to close $4 trillion in tax loopholes. If they can do it, God bless them, but I don't think they can. Thanks for checking out MSNBC on YouTube, and make sure you subscribe to stay up to date on the day's biggest stories. And you can click on any of the videos around us to watch more from Morning Joe and MSNBC. Thanks so much for watching.